Our first reading is Matthew 20, verses 1 to 16, the workers in the vineyard. The kingdom of heaven is like this. Once there was a man who went out early in the morning to hire some men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them the regular wage, a silver coin a day, and sent them to work in his vineyard. He went out again to the marketplace at 9 o'clock and saw some men standing there doing nothing. So he said to them, "You also go and work in the vineyard, and I'll pay you a fair wage." So they went. Then at 12 o'clock and again at 3 o'clock he did the same thing. It was nearly 5 o'clock when he went to the marketplace and saw some other men still standing there. "Why are you wasting the whole day here doing nothing?" he asked them. "No one hired us," they answered. "Well then, you go and work in the vineyard," he told them. When evening came, the owner told his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, starting with those who were hired last and ending with those who were hired first." The men who had begun to work at 5 o'clock were paid a silver coin each. So when the men who were the first to be hired came to be paid, they thought they would get more. But they too were given a silver coin each. They took their money and started grumbling against the employer. "These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "while we put up with a whole day's work in the hot sun, yet you paid them the same as you paid us." "Listen, friend," the owner answered one of them, "I have not cheated you. After all, you agreed to do a day's work for 1 silver coin. Now take your pay and go home. I want to give this man who was hired last as much as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do as I wish with my own money? Or are you jealous because I am generous?" And Jesus concluded, "So those who are last will be first, and those who are first will be last." Thanks be to God.
This reading is from Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32, the lost son. Jesus went on to say, "There once was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to him, 'Father, give me a share of the property now.' So the man divided his property between his 2 sons. After a few days, the younger son sold his part of the property and left home with the money. He went to a country far away and wasted his money in reckless living. He spent everything he had. Then a severe famine spread over the country, and he was left without a thing. So he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to a farm to take care of the pigs. He wished he could fill himself with the bean pods the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything to eat. At last he came to his senses and said, 'All my father's hired workers have more than they can eat, and I am here about to starve. I will get up and go to my father and say, "Father, I have sinned against God and against you. I am no longer fit to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired workers." So he got up and started back to his father. He was still a long way from home when his father saw him. His heart was filled with pity, and he ran, threw his arms around his son, and kissed him. "Father," the son said, "I have sinned against God and against you. I am no longer fit to be called your son." But the father called to his servants. "Hurry," he said, "bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet, and go and get the prize calf and kill it, and let us celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead, but now he is alive. He was lost, but now he is found." And so the feasting began. In the meantime, the older son was out in the field. On his way back, he called back to his when he came back close to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called to one of the servants and asked him, "What's going on?" "Your brother has come back home," the servant answered, "and your father has killed the prize calf because he got back safe and sound." The older brother was so angry that he would not go into the house. So his father came out and begged him to come in. But he spoke back to his father, "Look, all these years I have worked for you like a slave, and I have never disobeyed your orders. What have you given me? Not even a goat for me to have a feast with my friends. But this son of yours, you have wasted all your property on prostitutes. And when he came back home, you killed the prize calf for him." "My son," the father answered, "you are always here with me, and everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and be happy because your brother was dead, but now he is alive. He was lost, but now he is found." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
You might be familiar with the parable of the unforgiving servant. It wasn't one of our readings this morning, obviously, but it could easily have been so. In that story, you'll know the first servant receives grace in abundance. He has a debt beyond belief, really, beyond reality. It's an extortionate, exorbitant debt that this servant has, and he's forgiven it by the king. And then he goes out and fails or refuses, we're not quite sure which it is, but to show a similar sign of grace to another servant who owes him a paltry amount in comparison. And it strikes me that is an illustration, is illustrative of how many people are like, what they're like, how they act in life. Indeed, it's illustrative of how many Christians act often. You see, much of what goes on in the world, I think, can be described as graceless. And I wonder if this is what leads people to ask, isn't it enough to just do good to get into heaven? Because they don't see people acting with grace, and particularly don't see Christians acting with grace, and often don't see Christians acting with grace towards one another, let alone to anyone else. Because people outside the church aren't always shown an image of Christians being different to anyone else. You might remember me commenting in a previous sermon that Philip Yancey states that the single reason that drove him to write his book on grace, What's So Amazing About Grace, was hearing that horrific story about a prostitute who was renting out her daughter to men so that she could get money for drugs. And the thing you might remember me talking about, the thing about that story is about how it serves an indictment upon the church and upon Christians. And it does so because that woman, like so many people in trouble and difficulty, did not feel able to approach the church without fear of condemnation and recrimination. The person who shared that story with Philip Yancey said, "At last I asked her if she had ever thought of going to a church for help. He said, I will never forget the look of pure, naive shock that crossed her face. Church, she cried, why would I ever go there? I was already feeling terrible about myself. They would just make me feel worse." How awful is that to hear? Would we want people to think that about us? That if they were feeling terrible about life and about what was going on for them, that they wouldn't dare come into our church because they would feel that we would make them feel worse? That surely is not what the church is meant to be. That surely is not what the message of Jesus is all about. That surely is not what the grace of God is all about. But sadly, as we've already said, this woman is not unique. Far too many people who need to receive grace and love from the church only receive accusations and judgment. We find it far easier to shake our heads and suck our teeth than try to reach out in love to those who are in need. We're like those early workers in the parable of the vineyard that we heard read. We only see injustice according to our own standards. Well, they've got the same as I've got. That's not right. Or we're like the older son in the parable of the prodigal. We only see the bad that's happened. Look what he went away and did. And we're accusatory and condemnatory. And what a contrast this makes with Jesus. We, who claim to be his followers, who make up his church, have a tendency to drive away the very same sort of people that came running in their droves to be near him. People like the woman caught in adultery. People like the Samaritan woman he met at the well. People like Zacchaeus and many others. But how often are we like the unforgiving servant and not like Jesus? We accept the grace that God gives to us, and we are not gracious ourselves. This is what the grace of God is. Where someone appears to deserve condemnation, Jesus comes bringing compassion and love. Max Lucado says, I found these little quotes in the prayer room when I was in there before the service. Max Lucado says, the meaning of life, the wasted years of life, the poor choices of life, God answers the mess of life with one word: grace. In God's mercy and grace, he forgives us and still loves us despite ourselves. And there's good reason why God comes in Jesus bringing compassion and love. Because people respond so much better to love than condemnation, first of all. You know it yourself. If someone comes to you and condemns you for something, or tells you off for something, or says you didn't do that right, how do you react? Straight away, what? If someone comes to you friendly, loving, an arm round the shoulder, how do you react? Very different. And if people can be brought to a point where they accept that Jesus can help them, then the Holy Spirit will work to convict them within of their wrongdoing and bring them to a point where they can change. And as followers of Christ, we should show that same compassion and love. The church needs to show grace to the world and to do so actively and confidently. After all, if anyone had reason to recoil from the sinner, it was Jesus. Yet he did not turn away from them. And he does not turn away from us. Rather, he welcomes us all, seeing and knowing the need for love and healing. He wishes to bring everyone into his fold that they might be made clean. And if Jesus is willing to welcome us with all our faults and failings, and I know mine, I guess you know yours, and we've all got them, for none of us are without faults and failings, we know that. If Jesus is willing to welcome us, surely we should also be willing to welcome others. But how do we show grace to the world? How do we show grace to other people? Well, we start by looking at Jesus himself. We see how he treated people, other people that we would not want to associate with. But he loved them, he welcomed them, he cared for them. Are we willing to welcome those who are different? Are we willing to love those who do not meet our standards? Are we willing to care for those who are in need? Will we hitch up our robes and run to meet and embrace the penitent sinner before they have a chance to grovel, just as the father rushed to his son in the parable? Or will we be like the elder son and grumble when we see others receiving the blessings that we believe we have earned, forgetting that God's grace is never something that we can earn? Likewise, will we be willing to include those who have not shared in God's mission as long as we have, like the owner of the vineyard included all the workers? Or will we begrudge the new Christian, the new believer, when God blesses them in a way we wish we might be blessed? Perhaps seeking to share grace with the world is a big step for us. Perhaps we think it too great a step to make. Perhaps there are steps we need to take closer to home instead. Do we welcome, and I mean truly welcome, everyone who enters through the doors of this building? Or are there those who, if they ever did find the courage to come in, we would find it hard to extend the right hand of fellowship towards? Do we treat each other with grace as we should? Do we accept that we all make mistakes and slip up from time to time? Or are we quick to frown, to judge, to criticise when people do not do things exactly as we want them to? Perhaps instead of the frown, the judgment, the criticism, we should seek to smile, to accept, to encourage. Perhaps we could try to build up rather than put down. Perhaps we could be willing to take risks with who we welcome into the building. In that way, we might start to truly foster and encourage a community of grace that is modelled on the grace of God. You see, as I've said before, grace is preposterous. Grace makes what is unthinkable and impossible possible. Grace changes lives for the better, and grace gives us hope. Grace means that the ways of the world are turned upside down, that those who come to God, whoever they are and however they come, are welcomed and given equal rights in his kingdom. Grace means that we do not have to stick to the letter of the law, but that we have to do what is right in God's eyes. Grace means that we all receive everything that is good when what we deserve is entirely different. Grace means that everyone has a place at the table. Grace is a wonderful and marvellous thing, and it's our duty to share the grace of God with all people. So let us seek to do so. Amen.